Mic check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K Collector, and I am happy because I had this GoPro. I've had this GoPro 7 since about 2019, I think, or 2018. And I bought this back when I was getting ready to go on a trip to Maui. Because in researching my trip to Maui, I learned that there were a lot of places on the island of Maui that would allow you to rent these. But at the time, the cost to rent these, it didn't make sense. It just made more sense for me to buy one. So I actually bought one of these and I used it while I was there. Got my money's worth for sure. But it's kind of funny, like after that trip to Maui, like I rarely ever used it again. So it sat for a while. And I wasn't using it, and I think that battery ultimately just went kaputs. So I wound up having to get a new battery, and because at first I thought like, oh no, the whole camera itself was shot, but all it needed was a new battery, and boom, we're back in action. The reason why this is exciting for me is because GoPros, I think, are just easier to use when you're trying to capture film like out and about, in the street or on the road. It's a lot easier than pulling out your cell phone. I think it's a lot less conspicuous. You get a lot less eyes. And whenever you're living in a big city, you want to just try to be as inconspicuous as possible. So I was really glad to get this back up and running, as opposed to having to get a new one, a new GoPro or anything like that. And the battery for this was fairly inexpensive. It wasn't too crazy. So that's definitely an exciting thing for me to be able to have back in my arsenal of, cameras and things like that. And I don't have a ton of cameras. I do have the GoPro, which is something I use when I'm on the go, no pun intended. But I also have one of my favorite cameras of all time. It's this Sony A7S. This is the low light king. This camera was the camera to have back in maybe like 2014 maybe, or 2015, I think, was when this was really hot. I didn't get this until around 2016-ish. And this is the camera that I've used to shoot a lot of my family videos, personal projects, because as you know on this channel, I'm super into videography. And that's something that I want to showcase more here. It just seems like anytime I post something that I've put a lot of effort in, it's weird. It feels like YouTube goes out of its way to stunt those videos. It's almost like YouTube would rather me make these on the fly, raw, shot from the iPhone videos as to putting out something of quality. And no matter what type of music I use, or even if I don't use music, somehow I'm hit with some type of copyright strike, like as if I'm not capable of producing good video. I don't know. It's kind of annoying. But that's not the reason for this video today. The reason for this video is because, as you know, I've talked a lot about gaming. I've talked a lot about, where we're at as far as the economy goes. And yes, I'm still playing Batman. But I've been thinking a lot about priorities. And just, going into 2024, where our priorities are, where our priorities should be. And kind of what we should be focusing on. And I remember back in 2020 when I initially started really beefing up certain aspects of my collection, mainly like the more retro stuff. And I started going after certain games. I remember, whoa, something just dropped. Oh, that's ActRaiser 2. I remember I would read the forums and I would read a lot of the comments. And there would be a lot of folks who would say like, oh man, I miss the days of gaming, or the days where you could buy games at a reasonable price. And I would see a lot of comments that would say that you were able to still get like retro games at a very reasonable price up until like 2016. And if you hadn't been in the gaming market, or if you hadn't purchased your retro games by that point, everything from 2016 on was really like inflated, like the prices just jumped. Now, I'm sure prices have been rising for decades, right? So someone who bought the games back in like the 90s might say, oh, well, the prices were inflated in 2016. But if you compare like 2016 prices to maybe where the prices were at the height of the pandemic, which is where I think they were their highest, there was a huge gap in a lot of those prices. And I know prices for games have come down a significant amount, but I really started thinking to myself, like, man, what was I doing back in 2016? Why did I miss out on this rush? What happened? And for a second, you know, I kind of had that, not FOMO, but it was like, man, a part of me started to think like, man, I wish I would have kind of jumped on the wave a few years earlier. But then I had to sit and I had to think, like, what was I doing around that time that I wasn't thinking about video games? And I remembered at that time, I was working 12 hours a day because I was working to purchase my first home. And this was when I was in my late 20s. And I remembered thinking that every day that I would get up and go to work, I would just be grinding away. And for a few years, I would say for about 2 to 3 years, I did nothing. I went nowhere, never went out, didn't really buy any new clothes, didn't buy any games, didn't buy any trinkets. I had a very small apartment. I was in a studio apartment. You know, at the time I did have 2 cars. That was probably like my biggest expense, was a payment that I had on a car that's now paid off. But I did have a car that I was making payments on. And I think that was the one luxury thing that I had, because I did have a luxury car. And I think that was the one fun item that I had going on, but I really wasn't spending any money. And I remember back in 2016 was when I purchased my first home. And I was still in my 20s, and my age didn't really matter to me at that time. It didn't really dawn on me that I was buying a home in my 20s in a major city. Like, I wasn't buying a home in like Nebraska or like some part of the country where homes were, you know, 100,000 or 120,000. I spent over $500,000 in my 20s on my first home. And I just remembered how much energy that took out of me, because buying a home, especially, you know, at a certain price point, when you're doing it by yourself, you know, in your 20s, off of the strength of your own hard labor, it can be very stressful. And I remember I even lost weight during that process, just from the amount of stress that the banks were putting me through. I remembered, you know, just constant, you know, extra checks and extra verifications. And it almost felt like it was unfair. Like it almost felt like once I had provided the bank everything they needed, they were still coming back to me wanting to know more and wanting to know how I had this and how I had that. And it's almost like they couldn't believe that, you know, a young person in their 20s really just saved their money and put themselves in a position to purchase property. And where am I going with this? Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because it's 2024 and there is a whole new generation of young people. I'm still young. I'm not an old man. I'm still young, but I'm old enough to have done enough things in life to be able to look back at a generation that's maybe in their early 20s, maybe late teens, and kind of offer just a little bit of advice when it comes to priorities. And I would say, you know, if you're a young person or if you're someone who is, you know, in the process of starting to collect video games and you're starting to look at retro games like Super Nintendo games and you're trying to build a collection of really awesome games, I would ask you really at this point to kind of just pause, right? And assess your life. Look at where you're at in life. What are you doing in life? What does your life look like in terms of your overall goals? Is your only goal in life to build a video game collection and just have a bunch of games in a room? And if that's the case, what room are those games in? Are they in your mom's house? Are they in your dad's house? Are they in your apartment? Are they in your house? And I'm saying all this to say that I think sometimes as collectors, we kind of lose sight of priorities and we lose sight of the things that matter the most to us, or the things that are going to be more important to us in the long run. Now, when I began really building my collection, I was already somewhat established. I was established in my career. I was established as a homeowner. I was established with other investments. I just understood, I had a good understanding of who I was, and for me, the games became a really fun hobby. They became a really fun escape. And I knew in the back of my mind that I wasn't going to be as heavily involved in the collecting process as I was at the time. For those of you who are new to my channel, I'm the Y2K Collector, and I started this channel really at the height of the pandemic in 2020 when everything was shut down. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to do, right? Everyone was home. You couldn't do anything. All you had was your house and the stuff inside your house. For some, this was great. You got to stay home. You got to be with your family. You were probably living in a house that was big, that had a lot of rooms. You probably had a nice backyard that you could go back to and hang out and still get some fresh air without having to be in, large crowds. But not everybody was in that place. If you were in a city like New York, in a borough like Brooklyn or in Manhattan or in the Bronx, 9 times out of 10, you were probably in an apartment, in a small apartment at that, with no backyard, with the only fresh air you're getting is if you crack your window. And, you really had very few options when it came to being able to go outside and do things. And you didn't really have a lot of space. And I think this is where video games came in for folks who felt really confined. If you were in a confined space and you just didn't have anything to do, video games then became that space. I would like to think I was somewhere in between. I wasn't in a large palatial mansion, but I also wasn't in an apartment. Luckily, I had space. I had a backyard I could go out to and kind of get some fresh air. But even with that, video games were still a great way for me to just kind of get that extra layer of escape once I, logged off of work for the day. And once, I'd actually, spent that family time. Once I was like kind of alone in my thoughts, even if it was late at night, video games became that thing that was a great way for me to just kind of escape to and dive into. Now, we are 4 years removed from the pandemic, an official 4 years removed. Life has continued. In most parts of the country, restrictions have been lifted. And the world is resuming again, right? Like, people are getting back outside. And if there's anything that's changed from what I've seen, it's the playing field, right? I want to say pre-pandemic, opportunities were a lot better. Interest rates weren't where they're at now. Business opportunities weren't as stringent as they are now. I think that there was more opportunity for you to gain and build wealth prior to the pandemic than there is today. And I think it's just a much more challenging environment. But what does that mean? That doesn't mean that you give up and say, all right, well, I'm just going to veg out on video games for the rest of my life. No, it means that now this next generation, you have to be even more innovative. You have to be even more concentrated, and you have to be even more focused in whatever it is you're attempting to do to try and build your life, build your wealth, and achieve success. And as great as video games are, they really shouldn't be the priority if you don't have other things set in life. And I think that one advantage that we have now that we didn't have before is something that I've been talking about all week: artificial intelligence. And I've been talking about it all week because the more and more I look into it, the more and more I'm intrigued by it. And the other day, I spent time downloading about 4 artificial intelligence apps. I'm only going to talk about 2 of them, one of them being ChatGPT. I read a lot about ChatGPT. I'd watched a lot of videos on it, but I'd never actually used ChatGPT for myself, and it's pretty amazing. ChatGPT, if I had ChatGPT when I first started my YouTube channel, I think I'd be way farther ahead than I am now. And as I use ChatGPT for myself, I can see how other YouTube creators have leveraged the ChatGPT technology to, whether it be to write scripts, for videos, come up with ideas, find information. They've leveraged those tools to move a lot faster and a lot farther in a shorter period of time. And I think that's the advantage that we have now. I also downloaded another app called Starry. which is an app that allows you to create images. I think there's some video application to it as well. And these are apps that I plan on using and integrating even in my own production when it comes to my own YouTube channel. But for this week that I've had some time to think, I just, I've really felt like it was important to kind of just level set, look at the playing field, look at where I'm at, and also kind of just look at where our nation is, where the generation is, when it comes to technology, finance, when it comes to accessibility and availability. And video games are great. I love collecting them. I'm hanging on to the older stuff because that's the stuff that speaks to me. I'm selling more of like a lot of the PlayStation 4 games that are just re-releases, games that were already on the PlayStation 3, in some cases games that were on the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 1. Games like that I'm getting rid of. But if it's a unique game, if it's a game that, just kind of stands apart, those are the games that I'm buying and I'm keeping and I'm collecting. As many of you know, I've been into the Neo Geo. I've gotten a couple Neo Geo games these past couple weeks. So definitely been putting my attention towards the older stuff. But even when it comes to things like that, collecting for the Neo Geo isn't cheap. And the older stuff isn't cheap. Let's just be honest. If you're looking for retro games, anything in that 1990 to 1998-ish era is really where things are going to be really expensive, because that's where a lot of the nostalgia is. That's where we saw a lot of our most innovative games. And that's where you see, I feel like that was the most creative era, because a lot of what we see today are just spin-offs from things from that time. Now, I could be absolutely wrong, and I'm just giving you my worldview of things. I'm just sharing with you from my point of view. But I'm interested to know what you all think. I've gotten a lot of great comments on some of the videos that I've put out these past couple days, with people sharing their testimonials of, how their collecting habits have changed, how they've been prioritizing different things, how they've been focusing on their families or their finances or paying down bills or whatever the case may be. And this is a very serious thing. It's easy to get on YouTube and it's easy to see a bunch of YouTubers who have money, who have careers, who have jobs, who have financial stability, go out and buy games and spend money on games and do pickups and things like that, without realizing that these folks have already built an infrastructure for themselves to be able to support the hobby that they love so much. And if they're not spending money, then they're spending time. And time is really your most valuable resource. I mean, I'll be honest, like to burn an entire Saturday, like sometimes I think about how much time I spent driving around looking for stuff, and it feels like such a waste at this point. I want to dedicate so much more of that time to my family, to my daughter, to the ones that I love, because life is precious, real life is precious, and video games at the end of the day are just video games. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox now and ask you, what do you think? Am I way off here? Does anyone agree? Is this something that's just in my head, or is anyone else out there feeling the same things that I'm feeling, or seeing some of the same things that I'm seeing? Because there's definitely a shift occurring. I've said it before earlier in the week. There's a disturbance in the force. There's a shift in the force. We feel it. And I'm really interested to see where things go coming out of 2024 and going into 2025, because things are getting very difficult. It's becoming more difficult for people to get access, even get access to the ability to generate wealth, build wealth for themselves. It's getting tough. And I'm just interested to know what you all think. I know this week has been a bunch of topics that aren't just about how cool this Sega Genesis game is or the Super Nintendo game is, but I think these conversations are really important, especially for those in the gaming community, because it's easy for you to get lost in the echo chamber of video game talk and lose sight of the reality that's going on around you. So interested to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below. I'm the Y2K Collector. It's Friday. Weather's getting a little bit nicer. Hopefully you get a chance to get out, enjoy some of that time with family, and hopefully you're able to go snag a pretty good game and find something out there that's unique and special to you. But that does it for me. Y'all take it easy. Peace.